गुड इवनिंग एंड वेलकम टू गना शॉट। गना शॉट में आप सबका स्वागत है। प्रणाम, वणक्कम एंड जय हिंद। आज हम बात करने वाले हैं श्री गुरजीत सिंह से, जो हमारे पूर्व एम्बेसडर थे अफ्रीकन यूनियन, जर्मनी, एशियन वगैरह में। और इनके साथ हम बात करेंगे टेकअवेज ऑफ G20। G20 के बारे में हमने बहुत सुना है पिछले 2-4 दिन में। वो हमारा न्यूज़ में छाया हुआ है और आपने खुद एम्बेसडर साहब ने 4-5 आर्टिकल लिखा है और इनके आर्टिकल केन्या में भी छपे हैं और बाहर विदेश में भी बहुत छपे हैं। और ये भी मैं बताना चाहता हूँ, मैं इनसे बहुत शुक्रगुजार हूँ क्योंकि ये कल ही एशियन से जकार्ता से वापस आए हैं और कल परसों के दिन फिर विदेश जा रहे हैं। और इसके बीच में गणेश आउट में आने का इन्होंने कृपा की है। एंड थैंक यू सर, थैंक्स अ लॉट। I don't want to stand between you and the audience. The floor is all yours. Please take it over.
Thank you, General Shankar. You always honor me by inviting me to Gunner's Shot. I always feel very happy and empathetic to be here and speak to you and your audience. It is a great pleasure. I do my best to never say never to you, no to you. I always
Oh, thanks, sir. It's such a great honor.
So, the takeaways from the G20, it's a good title. After the pandemic, takeaway normally referred to food. But now we are coming back to the takeaways from G20. So, what is my initial takeaway? A feeling of immense happiness, pride. I feel that India is the consensus builder in the world. I believe we succeeded when everybody else thought we would fail. We succeeded in uniting a fractured world. We had the absence of Russia and China, but we succeeded in marshalling the global south and dealing with the G7. So I think it is a feeling of extreme happiness. Biggest takeaway is that the perception of India is extremely positively impacted by this. Our stature has risen. People see us as a country which could deliver an effective presidency. There have been many presidents, but sometimes you can't even recall who did what. So, in terms of what we did, the organization that we did, the deliverables that we worked at, amazing. So, I think when the G20 started, there were 3 doubts. The first doubt, which was cleared a few days before the summit, was whether the Chinese president would come. And so much attention was being paid in Indian media to that, which surprised me. In fact, the Chinese leader who attended was ignored. But most TV stations kept showing old pictures of the leader who did not come. I did not quite understand why we were so enamored of that. I don't think India lost in any way from the absence of President Xi Jinping. It is up to China to be led by whoever. And they have a new premier sworn in March, and he is represented them at the East Asia Summit, in the China ASEAN Summit, and now in the G20. So I think that's fine. The second issue was whether India would succeed in altering the membership of the G20. Now, this is where the African Union came in. Now, there was a lot of skepticism. No chairman has ever even tried to alter the membership of the G20 because they feared that there were countries like Spain and Netherlands waiting in the wings. There was ASEAN, and then maybe the Latin Americans who would also want in if you brought the African Union in. So nobody wanted to deal with this hive of bees to say what would happen. But India took an initiative which was linked to the theme of its presidency, which was that we are the spokesman of the global south. So you may recall that in January itself, we had the Voice of Global South Summit. And we started prioritizing, articulating, bringing forth the agenda which 125 countries of the Global South, which otherwise are outside the G20 process, articulated to us. And we brought them to the stage, and which is what leads to so many outcomes. Unprecedented number, I think 83 outcomes of the G20. Now, one of the ways of bringing the Global South into the G20 more forcefully was to include the African Union. Why? The European Union is already a member, as are Italy, Germany, France, who are all European Union members, and the UK, who was a European Union member. But from Africa, we had only one country, which is South Africa.
South Africa, yeah.
So we wanted that if the voice of Global South is to be articulated, particularly Africa, which is subjected to much lecturing, but very little commitment is actually followed up, we need them to talk to the world on an equal basis. Now, India has been championing the countries of Africa since the Bandung Conference of 1955, the first Afro-Asian conference.
Yeah.
You remember that. There were only 6 African countries at that time. Some of them not even independent. Sudan was not independent. The Gold Coast, which became Ghana, not independent. So please remember that in 1945, when the UN Charter is negotiated, there are actually only 4 African countries present. But today, there are 55 African
55,
countries
yeah.
in the African Union. Let me explain why 55 and why 54. So the African Union has 55 members. It includes the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic, or Polisario, which African Union recognizes, but the UN does not. So African Union has 55 members, out of which 54 are UN members. So I hope that clarifies sometimes this confusion of 54 and 55. India itself now does not recognize the Polisario. Earlier, at one time, we did, but now we don't. Now, by bringing Africa in, we stuck by our credential that we always champion Africa. Secondly, Africa wants to be at the high table and not be only the subject of discussions. It wants to be a part of the discussions. So, but in the UN, the way that the reform is going, the African membership of the UN Security Council on a permanent basis is distant dream. So in February 2023, the AU passed a resolution at its summit saying that it will pursue 2 permanent seats, one in the UN Permanent Security Council and the second in the G20. That is when they wrote to India and said, we count on you, as always, to support Africa. Now, in December 2022, at the Bali summit, the AU was represented by the president of Senegal, Macky Sall, like this year represented by Comoros. President Assoumani, right? So last year was Macky Sall, who was actually the champion of this whole idea. He approached Prime Minister Modi in Bali and basically said, India always stand and this is the best opportunity. So please do something. And Prime Minister Modi said, we'll do our best. And then people asked, why did India not announce this as an objective in January at the Voice of Global South Summit? If you recall, this issue was not mentioned.
This gained traction later.
Yeah. So it actually starts gaining traction around June. So what happens between January and June? I think in January, we are still focused on can we save the G20 from the Ukraine crisis. So much of our diplomatic effort is actually focused on that and in raising the Global South. So we are not trying to, tinker with anything. We are trying to just see how it goes. By mid-year, we realized that the Bali consensus on Ukraine is not going to hold. In every ministerial meeting, the Russians and the Chinese are objecting to that language. So we know something new has to be done. And to do that something new, we have to bring the heft of the global south into play. It is not good enough to say that 4 chairmen in succession, Indonesia, India, Brazil, and South Africa. You have to do something more. And that the Voice of Global South had done. And then by taking up this issue of the African Union, we forced every G20 member to take a position. So suddenly everybody started wondering, hey, what is India up to? Many G20 members had made loud announcements that they support the African Union as a member of the G20 when they met the AU bilaterally, say the Americans or the Chinese or the Russians.
But not
But none
together.
of them brought this proposal. So it was a low-cost option. I support you, but who is going to start the process? And everybody knew that it is not an easy process because of the reasons I have mentioned. But in June, before Prime Minister went to the US, he sent out a letter to all the heads of countries of the G20, including the European Union. Now, when he met President Biden, he raised it. When he spoke to the US Congress, he raised it. So he built up big power support. Up to a point, this went through. But it was not smooth sailing. In the end, there were several countries who were not saying no, but they were not assenting. They were not dissenting, but they were not assenting. So this finally happened in the last Sherpa's meeting, which is just on the eve. As a result, much to everybody's, and you see, the wisdom was that India will succeed in admitting the African Union, but the decision will probably be implemented in Brazil. Okay. That was the wisdom. But when the Prime Minister started the G20 summit, even before the first agenda item, we had this in the bag. So he said, I propose that we admit the African Union.
Yeah, and no one objected to it, and
the
end of the story.
He banged the gavel, and there it was. And then the Minister for External Affairs escorted the ecstatic President Assoumani to a chair, which was not as a guest now, but as a member. President Assoumani also said that he did not expect to be admitted as a full member now.
Okay.
So there was something happening which India managed. And I think it was very wise. After all the heavy lifting, all the diplomatic risk was taken by us. So there was no point in leaving the crowning to Brazil.
Brazil, yeah.
Do everything. So I think that was heartwarming to not see the whole process to the conclusion. That I think was significant of this.
So I also feel, you don't mind, I'd like you to highlight this. I also feel that the issue of admitting AU into the G20 negates the Sinocentric world order which China is trying to establish to a large extent.
Indeed,
and
not only
especially
the
this issue,
also the domination of the G7.
G7.
Both. So what India was trying to do was use the G7 to bind the world despite big power rivalry and use the heft of the global south for that. So that was both the glue and the reason to move ahead. We wanted not the West, not the Russians, not the Chinese to dominate the agenda. We wanted to set the agenda. So therefore, even on Ukraine's paragraph, I mean, it was evident that you simply can't cut and paste anymore. Situations were different. So let me come to the second. The second surprise was that in the afternoon of the same day, first day, 9th September,
The declaration came through.
yeah, just before the second session started, Prime Minister Modi announced a consensus on the leader statement. Now, again, practical wisdom was that India will not get it. There'll have to be a chairman's summary. There will be objections by Russia and China, and and many people went to the extent of saying, without a leader's consensual statement, the summit would have failed. I did not agree with that, but to be honest, I was prepared for a chairman's summary. So when this came so early, it was a very pleasant surprise. We did a survey about when do summits normally come up with the leader statement.
They come at the fag end normally, sir.
And people at the dinner are still negotiating, things are happening. But in the case of Indonesia, it came on the second morning, morning of the second day. But in the case of India, it came on the afternoon of the first day.
Or the first days.
Yeah, so which gave the whole summit a relaxed feeling so that you could discuss agendas in second and third sessions much more easily, without rancor, without any stress. And most of all, I think they would have all enjoyed President Murmu's dinner in a relaxed way because the declaration was out. Otherwise, I know many dinners when people are running around still trying to, pick things. So this was an amazing.
I think the essence of the whole story was, like you rightly said, two issues got over by the first half of the day, or the first half, or the first 1/3 of the summit. And these were the two elephants in the room. And once these were through, the rest was all, cakewalk.
So the first thing then, therefore, is the global south factor. And the second is the consensus building strength, which India showed. And this showed that India was not missing China. And India was now the chief interlocutor of the global south with the G7 and even with the other middle powers. I mean, there is Turkey, there is Mexico, there is Argentina, so there are others. But I think they all realized that India had taken the lead. So when the momentum had to be built to conclude the leader statement, Indonesia, India, Brazil, South Africa together played a very strong role. And soon they were joined by Turkey, Mexico, Argentina, and Saudi Arabia. So these 8 countries, many of whom are actually BRICS countries, played a role. And the final point in this, if China was a quiet participant, it was China's loss, not ours.
That was apparent.
Right. So this, I think, was the 3 geopolitical aspects. Now, what are the other important takeaways? So if you look at the leaders' declaration, it has many things, but none of them are binding or implementing authority behind them. They are the guidelines of where the world ought to go. But there were 13 ministerial meetings, all of which had outcome documents. Now, they are called chairman's summary and outcome document because all of them had 2 paragraphs on Ukraine to which the Russians and Chinese had put reservations. So because of that, all these 13 documents were not called outcome document, but were called chairman's summary on outcomes. But General Shankar, I put it to you that those 13 documents are full of so many outcomes that if they are followed, and I think India intends to follow them, you will certainly be heading to a better world. So don't look only at the leader's declaration because that is a synthesis of 13 meetings. But those 13 meetings have their own worth.
Yes, sir. There's no doubt.
Now, I would like to pick a few things. which to me are important. See, significant, everything is significant. Let me just pick which I think are very important. One, you had mentioned earlier about the digital public infrastructure.
Yes, sir.
Now, this is unprecedented. So, India raised this issue of a DPI repository, right? Now, there is great value attached to India's success in the DPI. The World Bank, the IMF, and many countries bilaterally speak about it. But in the G20, other than noting the fact that India intends to set up this repository, there was no such thing as widespread support or an institution building, which means that we have to work harder. We have something good going for us and we should do it with countries who are willing. Like we are doing it with Singapore, UAE, many others. And when I was in Jakarta, the Singaporeans told me that the ASEAN is having an internal kind of a UPI, and when that is ready, Singapore will link us with ASEAN. So it will happen because this is an idea whose time has come. Second was the areas related to green economy. So we did not just simply rehash what has always been said. We tried to come up with new ideas. One of them is the Biofuels Alliance, because countries in the developing world have very large amount of biomass which goes waste, and actually it is polluting because many people burn it. How to convert it to ethanol? It requires injection of capital and technology, and then you can blend it with petroleum, reducing carbon emissions, reducing your petroleum bill. So the Biofuels Alliance is very important. But again, it was noted. It was not adopted by the G20 as their initiative. But I think we are used to it. The International Solar Alliance, the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure are Indian initiatives, and we are pursuing them with like-minded countries. In some cases, more come quickly, some cases less. So these two are also important initiatives which India will now pursue with like-minded countries. Then there is the issue of the green credit system. Now, we always talk about carbon credits. And we are also talking about the $100 billion which the OECD countries promised, and it has never come. Now, either you can keep criticizing them and you did not keep your promises, but that was not the tenor of this G20. It was actually very assimilative. So, it talked about trillions of dollars are required for the green transition, both for adaptation and mitigation. And everybody has to make efforts. Now, in this, we are drawing a gentle nuance. The Chinese claim that they are a developing country. But with a GDP per capita over $10,000, you are no developing country.
Yeah.
And we don't think they are a part of the global south. They think that India is trying to diddle them out of the global south, but to us, they are not the global south. Secondly, 56% of coal emissions in the world come from China. They contribute more than all the OECD countries combined. Now, to hide behind that is cheating. So, therefore, we did not want to point fingers only at the West. We also want to point a finger at China. And this means that the China-India Association in the climate change negotiation is now not going to happen. We are taking a different track. We are being a responsible power. Our INDCs are better than China. Our implementation is better than China.
Oh, yes.
We are getting support from Germany and others because we are doing successful things. So our transition to the green economy is good. But at the same time, we remain cognizant, and this is not mentioned in the declaration, that countries make announcements and then don't fulfill them. At the G20 summit in Bali, the US and Japan promised $20 billion for a just energy transition. Vietnam was promised $15.5 billion by the EU. Not $1 has moved because they haven't got the system in place. So there were no new announced commitments this time. There were good intentions which were commonly arrived at. There was no finger pointing. Therefore, I think the consensus building was far more than only on the question of Ukraine. One thing beyond, two other things I would like to mention. This idea about the green credits system is different from carbon credits. It is slightly positive. The carbon credits are you pay somebody else for what you are doing, whereas green credits have to be earned. I think one of the most salient emphasis in our declaration is that of gender in development, women in development. The emphasis that has been brought is not just that women are important, but women are an integral part of development. And this has a running theme across many paragraphs and many outcome documents. So I think this recognition that women need to be better understood, better assimilated, and treated better as economic factors is very important. And I'm so happy that India took that lead. Normally, you would expect, a European country to do that. India took that lead. Another part is about the SDGs. Now, I think within a few weeks, there will be a UN SDG summit. And then we will be jolted because we will be told how far back we have fallen. So, the momentum which the Western countries had in supporting SDGs in the global south is shattered. This is partly because of their own crisis with Russia, consequent economic downturn, and the energy crisis. So they themselves are falling behind on many indicators. And the pandemic and the shock of the Ukraine crisis has also set back many of the developing countries. So a big shock is going to come when we find that we are going to be pushed back. Now, you may say, okay, we shift the date to 2035, but that's not the answer. The answer is, where are the additional funds going to come? Now, this is where I believe that India and the global south should not remain dependent on others. We should set up a self-help group led by the bigger countries of the global south. Let's begin with India, Indonesia, South Africa, and Brazil. Add Nigeria, Argentina, Saudi, UAE, and others, Singapore, so that the G7 and China can contribute. But the decision making should be with us. Priority setting should be with us. And we should simply help the global south countries to implement the SDGs. There is an example. There is an IPSA fund, very small IPSA fund, India, Brazil, South Africa. It is run by the UN South-South Cooperation Office. And it does very small grassroots projects in small countries in Asia, Africa, and Africa. We can do it bigger. So I think that is something I believe that we should do. And for this, we must remember that India's positive perception in the global south comes from successful development cooperation, the Harambe factor, with Africa, with Asia, ASEAN, with South Pacific, with Central Asia, with CARICOM, with everybody. So this needs to be reoriented and expanded. And we must get others to contribute from the global south. That way, we will show a sense of responsibility and we will be responding to what our neighbors do. For instance, you can see how much we do in Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka. This is the example. We actually do very big things there. I am still saying other things. So that I think is something that we need to build on. Another
In fact, I
example of
think
this,
so. If I may interject, one
of
of the
course,
biggest takeaways and positive thing about this whole thing which you're saying is Afghanistan. Even
yes,
Taliban wants to reach out to you,
correct.
and they've gone inimical against Pakistan.
That's a very good example of how India's development model is
Model
so
is
acceptable.
working.
Yeah, very true. And finally, I want to say that there is this concept of trilateral cooperation, which I am a great votary of, which basically means India and another developing country working with a developed country. So we are already working with Germany in Latin America and Africa. We are looking at the European Union. We have got a fund with the UK. We are looking at France, looking at Germany, Korea. So this can be expanded. So the same self-help group can also get help from others, but the controls on the projects must remain with us. And we must make sure that they are beneficial. So this will reduce the cost of delivery of the OECD countries' projects and improve the impact. So this is what is called making the right impact. That should be more important. And that impact India can help in making. Finally, now it linked to this, that on the sidelines of the third session, which focused on infrastructure and sustainability, there was the
IMEC.
IMECC. Yeah. So that is an American led project which has strategic goals, but it basically traverses age old linkages between India, West Asia, and the Roman Empire
Okay.
of trade. At that time, nobody said where is the debt. Nobody said how will you link. They were the Dhau trade between India and West Asia. From West Asia, it went by caravans, overland, and then again it went by sea into the Roman Empire. This is well established. Now we are trying to create a new version of that, which is what we call multimodal, which will be by ship from India and then railway through UAE, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Israel, again the port into Europe, and then road and rail transport within Europe. This, I think, is significant because this opens up new markets with countries who are India's big trading partners. You know, UAE, the Gulf, Europe are all 100 billion plus trading partners, much like China and ASEAN are. But on that side, we don't have
Yeah,
Japan,
we
for
don't have the
instance,
linkages.
a project like this, right? But here we do. So this will give an impetus to the India EU FTA. It will give an impetus to the India Gulf Cooperation Council FTA.
And not
Most
only
of
that,
all,
sir, the point
I'm
you're
looking
making is
forward to railway equipment being
yeah,
sourced from India
India.
and transshipment and corridors for green energy, including hydrogen, which will all be produced in India, being sent through these channels into Europe through West Asia. So I think the G20 started with a great perception builder, Vasudev Kutumbakam to the nth degree. The world is truly one and one family. And we wish to deal with everybody. And I must say, we were generous. Even in the press conference, I heard our foreign minister say he did not criticize China. He said China was helpful in the
Yeah,
leaders' debate, which is a fact because had they kept objecting, which they did in the ministerial meeting, by the way, they kept
yeah,
putting, but in the final analysis, they pulled it out. So I think we had a good relationship with Russia. We did manage it with China. The global south stood by us. The emerging markets backed us, and the G7 was there. So I think this was the best result, not only for India but for the world, because I think we have brought multilateralism and multipolar world back to the table, and that
yeah,
I think is the best conclusion. Thank you.
yeah. Thanks a lot, sir. I just like to add one, point to the last issue which we were discussing about the IMEC. The IMEC, unlike the CPC or the BRI, will succeed. It will succeed for two, three issues. This is my opinion. I would like your comment on it. It will succeed because there is no creditor or a debtor nation in this. All the nations have their skin in the game, and
Yes.
they have all of them have equity to get out of it. And in the ultimate analysis, probably everyone has to invest into it. It's a collaborative effort, and where you everyone is interdependent on each other. Unlike the CPC or the BRI, where there's a debtor and the creditor nation, where the benefits go to someone else and the other country is impoverished. So I think the IMEC conceptually is a win-win kind of a situation. Of course, it's a different issue whether it can be pulled out. And how do you see this comparison which I've just put across to you?
I fully agree with you. It's an investment-led model, not a debt-led model. So
Yeah,
which and so UAE, Saudi Arabia, EU, America, these are not countries going into debt. They are happily to put in the credits, put in guarantees, put in money from credit on the sovereign fund, and they are all going to benefit. So they are all interested. The only issue is that since so many countries are involved, how will you have a setting of standards and marrying of procurement rules? I believe in the next 60 days, it is these kind of things which will be sorted out.
yeah, I suppose so. And I'm sure the I2U2 went a long way in
Yes,
making the groundwork for this. So
indeed.
because the I2U2 itself will probably be the sheet anchor for this. That's the way I look at it, and I hope it does happen that way. So
Well,
the second point which I wanted to your view and put it across to everyone is today in the Wall Street Journal, or rather yesterday's Wall Street Journal, Walter Russell Mead has come out and said there's a shifting world order and a new power structure is coming up, and he's spoken of India in that. Uh, and like we were discussing earlier, India is in a sweet spot and everything is going well. How do you think we should sustain it, and what are the dangers to this whole story?
you know, eh, I think yesterday there was this India Sri Lanka Asia Cup match, and there
Yeah,
was this young bowler who bundled us out by taking five
yeah.
wickets.
Well,
Right?
again,
Yeah. Then he comes back and starts hitting us, including hitting our best bowler for sixes.
sixes.
That is a sweet spot, but they still lost the match.
Yeah,
Now, that is something we need to learn from. That we are
I
in
think
a
it's
sweet
a
spot,
see.
but we can't lose this match. So there are some views. One view says that India is on a roll. Our economy will grow. We will become the third largest economy by 2030, come what may. Because India has a natural momentum. Europe is losing momentum. Chinese economy shuddering, Japanese economy shuddering. So India is bound to succeed. But that is one. The other one is that after the next elections, I believe India will take a lot more of domestic policy reform. Because one of the things which you notice is that the Japanese and the Korean leaders in their bilaterals mentioned that their business communities are still uneasy about the ease of doing business in India.
Yeah,
And it is not only that they said it in public after that. So that means there is sufficient concern, which means what? That they are our friends after all. They are our leading investors. So we
yes,
need to pay more attention to this. We need to create more jobs. We need more manufacturing investment. We are getting a lot of investment in the stock market and through mergers and acquisitions. So we need to change that direction. That I believe a post election government will be able to do. A pre election government going into election will find that difficult. So I think we just need to be patient.
yeah.
So that
I,
will happen.
I, I agree with you completely on this, sir. And I will say I have a mixed take on this. I'm of the old school view. In fact, I'm of the view that nothing can stop India. And the reasons are this. I mean, I'd like a view also on this. Even if you don't agree with me, it's okay. You see, if you look at it, the countries which are ahead of us, leave USA out, China, Japan, and Germany. All three of them have had more than 50 years of a peace dividend. They were completely aided and restructured economies, either aided or completely restructured by the USA. And they were given completely, they sailed through the past 50, 60 years with tailwinds. On the other hand, you look at India, if we examine our own case, for the past 50 to 60 years, we've only faced headwinds. You know, After all, till 2000, you'll agree with me, the USA was on the opposite side. We've gone through n number of sanctions. We've gone through 4 wars, a proxy war, right? And a whole lot of new rivalry with today with China, which has spun a lot of webs around us, and it is not allowing us to do many things which we have to do as a nation which is rising. Despite all this, we are number 4. Despite the fact that we have not changed, we are not, enough for the world to invest in us. We are number 4 economy, and even if you don't change, the fact that you will become the number 5 economy today, the fact that you'll one day become 4 and one day become 3 is inevitable. That's the way I look at it. The difference is in the speed at which you go. If you want to go faster to that destination or to those spots, you need second part what you said, internal reform, ease of doing business, giving more a reassurance to people who want to invest in us. And that I agree with you completely. This government will not be able to do. The next government which comes post 2024 elections should be able to do it. So
Yeah,
I
so
am
I,
of this opinion. Your views on it? Or
no, I agree with your assessment. I would like to say that over the last 9 years, this government has gone a long way on reform.
yeah, yes, there's no
But
doubt.
in a country like India, you have to go even a longer way, and that is what I
Yeah, there's
think.
a long goal. Yeah, sir.
On your
There's a
point
huge.
about the natural resilience of India to statistically rise to number 3, yes, I agree with you. But the point is that if you want to reduce real poverty in India, and more than that, bring those people into a working job, employment,
That's
so that they
yeah.
contribute to the economy, then you need to grow at 9 to 10%, not at the rate you are growing.
Not yeah. I agree with you there. That I
So that,
agree with you completely, without doubt, sir. The last
and
point
I
I
think
want to.
so that is where the world sees us as a economic fulcrum, and therefore they are coming to us
Yes, sir.
as a marketplace for weaponry, as a marketplace for technology, as a place to set up, technology centers. Recently I was in Jakarta and I was on a panel with 4 bankers, 2 from Indonesia, 1 from Malaysia, 1 from Korea. And I found that all of them had been visiting Bangalore because they all had about 1,000 employees each. It's not so well known.
Yes, I completely agree with you because we have some tremendous strengths which we can give to the world. And if I may hazard a guess, the first itself, defense. Apart from getting modernization in defense and all that internally, I think we have tremendous scope for export in defense, because export in defense gives you two things. One, it gives you hard currency, right? The second, it gives you diplomacy, better diplomacy. And especially in view of the fact that people are, now, actually, this is a report which just came a few days back, that the share of defense exports of China is reducing. It is reducing because the Chinese defense equipment have proven to be unreliable, untested, and of low quality. And this is a proven fact. This is not something which I'm saying. This is what CIPRI is saying. So there's an opportunity, and I think that opportunity we should grab with both hands. The second thing, which I think is very important and which is a great strength of us, which to some extent we have exploited, and to some extent, and the scope is huge, is health. Health, or capability in health, in monetizing health. in a big way is tremendous. When I say health, I'm not looking at only pharmaceuticals. I'm looking at pharmaceuticals. I'm looking at health products. I'm also looking at health manufacturing, and I'm also looking at health services. After all, I'm living in a city, Chennai, which has been, which the Chinese call it as the health destination. I mean, this is something which I didn't know. It came out in the South China Morning Post saying that this is the health center of India. So I think this is one huge area which we have to exploit. The third thing, of course, is IT. IT, the whole story is limitless, and I think we have to go a long way. And I think the main rider for this is our partnership, ISET. Our capability to convert ISET into practical issues, which we concluded with the USA, will go a long way in transforming India, because that creates lot of jobs, lot of jobs. And the fourth thing which I would like to hazard a guess, and this is probably a little contra to everything, but it gels with what you said also a little earlier, is energy. I think we have a lot to play in the energy security of this world. And our ability to generate energy and provide it to the world is huge. And it combines with the fact that you've gone to the moon, you have limitless thorium, you have a lot of other issues, and you've gone into a great strategic partnership which is on the upward trajectory with USA, and it gives a lot of scope. So I think if we can focus just on these three or four of these, there's a huge scope. Your views, and then we'll take
Well,
questions.
I fully agree with you, but I would only like to add agriculture.
Yeah,
Agriculture,
food. Yes,
we are the ones who countries now look to fulfill their food security. The West Asian countries want to invest in India to get food, vegetables, and staples to supply them at times regularly, not only at times of crisis. But countries in Africa and ASEAN now depend on India for rice and wheat. So we are seen as the friendly food security provider. I know in defense services you are very used to providing net security.
security. No, yeah, yeah,
Net
you're right.
security includes food and health security and HADR, right?
Yeah,
So these are
HADR.
important.
No, I think HADR is another huge thing, because that was, that came to fore during the 2004 tsunami. When, I keep making this point all over again and again and again. In 2004 tsunami, we were hit. But despite this, we went out to help nations. China was not hit in 2004. It stuck to its ports. And this is something which often we don't play up. But apart from the fact that we play up or not play up, this is our capacity which we need to exploit.
So in the
Especially in,
old international relations, this was called the second strike capability. It
yeah,
was that if you are
that,
hit by a nuclear attack, you still have the resilience to hit back. Second strike capability. Now, this
yeah,
second strike capability against climate distress is what good HADR is.
yes, yes.
That is what we
I,
have.
I completely agree with you, and I think this is the future. And actually, you touched upon a very important thing, sir. Why? Because the way climate change is happening, climate change is triggering a lot of disasters. We've seen that last year in Pakistan, where half Pakistan was sunk. Today, you've seen that in Morocco with this landslide, and more importantly, in Libya,
Yeah.
because of unseasonal rains, the dams have washed away, and more people have died in Libya due to floods than the number of people in Morocco due to this earthquake.
Yes.
And of course, our own unseasonal problems in Himachal. So I think if you look at this holistically, HADR is going to be a very important thing which we have to capitalize on.
That is
And
why
I think,
the coalition for disaster resilient infrastructure. That is a very important thing. Somehow it is not getting the traction internationally that it should. Because frankly, I think globally, we are still focused on change for financial reasons. We are
yeah,
not actually trying to see how how we can mitigate it by adapting existing technology.
Yeah, I think that's a very important thing, sir. I think we've traversed a whole lot of things. We've seen what G20 is, we've seen, and we've gone beyond that to see into the future. As India goes up the value chain of power, what does it need to do? What does it need to maximize? GCB maximize, like what the ambassador said. I think we're going a long way, and personally, I feel very confident about this whole affair, especially because as far as food is concerned, Annadata. We've been Annadatas to a lot of people as part of Vasudeva Kutumbakam for the simple reason that in the last 1 year, we didn't succumb to pressures from rich countries to give food to them, but we gave to the needy and those who couldn't afford it. So I think that has got its own value. With this, I'll take a few questions and then we'll wind it up, sir.
Thank you.
Uh, So, despite the non binding nature of G20 consensus, Lavrov and Putin expressed their gratitude. Would your guest help us concretize the strategic significance of such multilateral declarations? And mind you, sir, this question was on the thing, Anand had put it an hour before our talk started.
That is called a premeditated strike, right?
I
Yeah.
mean,
Okay.
that's the interest which this talk has generated.
So, without Russian concurrence, the consensus would not have obtained. And we helped Russia in not getting condemned by name. So our paragraphs are many more on Ukraine than the Bali Declaration, but they are less harsh on Russia. But this lack of harshness is only the direct one. The indirect criticism is all there. We refer to the Bali Declaration, we refer to the UN resolutions, we refer to all the principles that Russia has violated territorial integrity, invasion, this, that. But I think by not naming Russia, you score one important point. You generally make this applicable to everybody who undertakes aggression, and for this, China is also in the crosshairs.
Yeah, that is actually the finesse, sir.
Yeah, but then strategic significance. I mean, is the Ukraine war going to end because we had a consensual paragraph? No. Did the Ukraine war end because of harsh paragraphs in Bali? No. So this is not going to. That war has to take its own course.
Yeah,
So
I
that
think
I'm
so, sir.
afraid the G20 consensus is the diplomatic focus on what is the world and what we should do about it. And it sort of kept the Ukraine crisis away from derailing the process.
Yeah, I think so, sir. Right. Uh, After China, Pak, our undeclared third enemy, or after China and Pak, our undeclared third enemy is Canada. For 40 years, it is the open protector of Khalistanis. It has blood of Punjabis on its hands. Why not cut ties with this 6 month frozen land? It's a rather extreme question, but I'll take it on because we need to discuss it at some point of time or the other. And yesterday, to some extent, I did discuss it with General KJ Singh, who was a former Western Army commander, when we spoke of Punjab.
You know, Canada has carried out a policy towards India which is beholden to its domestic electoral
Yes,
politics.
politics.
And it doesn't seem to care about India as an important economic partner, a scientific technology partner, to the extent that even the FTA negotiations, Canada put them on hold before the G20. Now, this reaction is very different from the UK. Even there, the FTA is going nowhere, but they are still engaged. There also, we have a Khalistani problem, but there Rishi Sunak said, no, no, we are going to do something. So the point is, whether you do or not, that comes later. But the approach that, say, the UK has adopted shows much better appreciation of India as a partner. And Canada has chosen its domestic problems and convulsions over a partnership with India. this leads to a marginalization of Canada from relationship with India. And I think at the G20, they were also marginalized because they were pleading for a bilateral with the Prime Minister. All they got is a pull aside. And then you see the Canadian media and how critical they are of not being able to take advantage of the opportunity that is India. Instead, relying on, a domestic problem, which perhaps keeps this government in
Alive.
power. Yeah.
Yeah, there's no this thing. And this is the thing which we got
But I
yesterday
don't
also.
agree. But I am not in favor of breaking relations with
No,
any
no,
country.
that is
As a
no, that
diplomat,
is
we must always keep, we must protect ourselves. They have no business targeting our diplomats and the government
yeah,
not doing much about it. That is wrong.
yeah.
But we should not cut relationships.
On that, there's no two ways, sir. The second part of the question of cutting ties is out of question. But I think what you said and what General KJ Singh said yesterday also, actually it gels and it's right. Uh, it's quite myopic on the part of Canada to look inward on domestic politics and externalize domestic politics onto the international stage. I suppose some sense will come as we go along, and we'll leave it at that. Of course, the next question is: this is a new guy who's come Caratex. By adding AU in the G20, isn't G21 becoming sort of UN with so many members being included?
No, not really. Please remember that the UN has 193 members. So this is nothing. 21 is nothing. But these 21 have about 85% of global GDP. And therefore, their sense of what to do with the economy matters more. And it is not only that G21, actually 43 leaders, institutional leaders, meet because there's the WHO, WTO, World Bank, IMF, and there are some permanent invitees. There is the chairman of ASEAN who's a permanent invitee. This time it is Indonesia. So Indonesia is a member. So there was no additional country present. Last year Cambodia was present. Next year Laos will be present because Indonesia is the only ASEAN member of the G20 by itself. And this year they happen to be the ASEAN chair too. And there is also Spain, which is a permanent invitee. And I think the Netherlands, because when the G20 was formed, all the Europeans wanted to be in. So some had to be kept out. So Spain and Netherlands were kept out, but then they were told that you will always be invited. So they are like a permanent invitee, like the other institutions I mentioned. And the African Union was in that category. So it has been upgraded into a membership. So it is not that suddenly, and I don't think the G20 will become 20. It will be G20. G20 plus so many. And that number is not changing because AU was always there as a guest. It is now simply participating in all meetings. That means they will have a Sherpa to participate, which earlier they did not have.
Right. The next question. Oh, sorry. Okay. Right. Okay. This question actually you answered earlier, sir, but I'll just go through it because we've done a whole show on this. How should we leverage relations with the African Union going forward? What strategic vision would you outline? What would you say should be the top 5 priorities in this approach? I'd like to tell India, that is Bharat, that the good ambassador and I did a whole show on Africa. We spent 1 hour on Africa. I would request you to go back on that and you'll get the answer to that. Right? I think you come for the first time on Gunner Shot, so you probably don't have an idea of what we've done. But I would like you to, go there. Right?
Yeah.
Sayantan says, thank you so much, sir, for bringing this video. Although you'd explained about G20 in the previous video, but I always wanted such a long and deep discussion like today. I completely agree with you. We should thank the ambassador because I know I have a limitation in my depth of understanding of these issues. फौजी
Sir,
है थोड़ा
no, you gave a very good synopsis on the same day. It is very
yeah.
difficult to give analysis as something is happening, but you did it. It was wonderful. I saw that.
Oh, thanks a lot, sir. But A deeper understanding is someone who understands what's going on. For people like us who view it from a little away, you get the bird's eye view, you get this thing. But I think today my understanding of G20 and the road ahead is far clearer after having spoken to you, and I must
Thank
thank
you.
you for that. And I think that's coming through from our viewers. Okay. Uh, South Africa took the credit of AU joining G20. Most of the African media is mentioning this on their TV news channels. In this case, how did Bharat benefit from this exercise?
Well, I think the rest of Africa knows who got them in. Uh, it's okay, South Africa wants to claim credit, but South Africa did support the process, yes, but they were not the initiators of it. I told you the story today how Senegal approached us. That time, Senegal was the AU chair, and Prime Minister Modi said, "Yes, I will do it." So I didn't add one more. So in I think July or August at the BRICS summit, President Macky Sall was there again, invited by South Africa as president of Senegal now. And he met PM Modi and reminded him and said, I know you have done a lot by writing to all the G20. You have kept your promise to try. So Prime Minister Modi said, yes, you just wait for the result. So Macky Sall said that he was very proud that India had tried, but he was not certain of the result. But I think PM Modi was very certain of the result. He knew he will get it done, and he did. So I think you heard the president of Comoros, what he said, and I've heard the African Union statement. I've got many messages from my friends in Africa. Nobody mentions the South Africans. South Africans also I've spoken to. They are also very happy. So I mean, I don't think this is the time to quibble. Let's be
No,
clear
I
that
mean, so I'd like to
all
just show this.
yeah.
Like to just show this. You see,
Yeah.
what does the president of the AU talk? He says India is the world's fifth superpower ahead of China now, and there's a news report which he's made a statement. So I think that says it all, and what the ambassador is saying, just highlights this whole story, right? So I don't think we should. Yeah, what he said is important. We shouldn't pick hairs, on all these small things and start
All 19 countries and the European Union concurred in India's proposal to elevate African Union from a guest status to a permanent membership. So if any one of them wants to also take credit for it, there is no harm because yes, let's be honest, they were part of the consensus, but they were not the initiators of the proposal. That was entirely the political risk, diplomatic risk taken by India. And I think that Africa understands.
right. There's this question, sir. How will Arabs invest in our Kheti, buy land, Khet? This is one part of the story. There's another similar question later where he says, Sir, Ambassador, sir, will the Saudis and Emirates be allowed to invest in our national oil assets, including refining oil and gas exploration? So, I mean, what the fundamental question is, how far will the Saudis and Emirates be allowed to invest in India?
So the South, as far as I know, UAE has been talking about $100 billion of investment in India for a few years. They have not found the right vehicles for that. The Saudis are coming in specifically into projects like refinery or investing in existing in big Indian company by mergers and acquisitions, uh, building up strategic oil reserves in India. Now, when the other person asked about the kheti, you know, I don't think any of them are investing in actual agriculture. They are investing in processing. So whether it's vegetables, whether it is staples, it's all processed and taken. I know of Saudi investors who have invested in Indian rice companies. I know of other Gulf investors who are looking at vegetable processing units because then they will take it and supply themselves. So it is like providing their food market to Indian food processing industry, which will get a big benefit out of this. By when they invest and say we are joint ventures with you, you do the farming and collect the stuff, process it, we will buy it, we'll invest in you. That model actually creates jobs in India. So I support that model. And there's
Right.
no harm in it because they are not taking over the land.
Yeah, I think so. The last comment is yes, it's a very good, deep discussion. We must thank the ambassador for that. There are few
Thank you.
more questions. Some of these questions I'll take over the weekend when it's an open session, because some they are not actually related to G20, but we'll take them on over the weekend. I At the end, it leaves me, it gives me great pleasure and great satisfaction that Ambassador Gurjit Singh clarified our ideas and answered all your questions so patiently, and actually opened up the G20, the innards of the G20 as we need to understand it. So thanks a lot for your effort, and thanks a lot for being on Gunner Shot once again. I look forward to it sometime next month. Once you finish your travels and get back, we'll talk, and I'm sure something else more will come up, and we'll have this thing. Your final words, and then we'll say Jai Hind.
Thank you. And I must say, I was very happy to be with you again. And I look forward to your invitation to talk to your audience once again. Thank you so much, General Shankar.
Thanks a
Jai.
lot, sir. And Anurag says, thank you, Ambassador, for today. Yes, thanks a lot to the Ambassador, and thanks a lot for all of you for coming up with some wonderful questions. Thanks a lot, and Jai Hind.